Okay, this week in the Dance is Us series, we're unpacking the theme of I for Island, both the metaphorical kind and the geographical. So, just asking a few questions. How do John Donne's words, "No man is an island," resonate today? Does being an island inhabitant set us apart in ways beyond the geographical? And what is the geographical impact on an artistic practice? Also taking into account the idea that islands are thought of as places where life flows at a different pace and with an alternative ethos. So this week, exploring those themes, we're starting all those questions, starting with Charlie Cauchi, who's a published researcher, producer, artist, and filmmaker. We've invited Charlie to this podcast as someone whose work often explores identity and migration, and most notably her recent works, Latitude 36, which was part of the 2018 European Capital of Culture program, and Sempre Viva, which was a 3-screen installation. Both examine the Maltese diaspora. Charlie's produced a number of short films, and she's currently producing and directing a full-length, feature-length documentary. So welcome, Charlie.
Hey, hi.
Good to have you here.
Thank you for
I'm beginning each of these interviews with the same question, just to set the scene here and to remind us that this podcast is being produced by ÄÄFinMalta, which is the national dance company. So to set the scene and address the purpose of the podcast, which is really to reveal the myriad ways in which dance features in our lives, and to show that everyone has a relationship with movement and an experience of dance. So tell me, what is your earliest or most vivid memory of dance?
So, what is my earliest? Most vividly, I used to go to dance classes when I was a kid, but really young, to Sylvia Young in London. And I didn't go for very long, but I just remember being in this room with all these ballerinas and just loving being taught how to dance. And I still have my I did ballet and tap, and I still have my ballet shoes and my tap shoes, and they're super tiny, and I've always kept them. I think they're the only constant thing I've had that have moved with me. And a few years ago, in a too much wine filled eBay moment, I decided to buy a pair of tap shoes because I thought, yes, I can do this. And I never used them. They arrived, they were red. I never used them until last week, I think, when the quarantine madness kind of peaked a little bit. I tried to do an online tap dancing class, which didn't go that well, but it was fun. I did it for an hour. My tiles are really scuffed now. But yeah.
I think you should stick with that one.
And it was super fun.
Go, please.
Yeah. Oh no, that's not happening. But yeah, those are my earliest memories of dance, is being in this dancing school, and but just the ambience of it, and the wooden floors, and it had this particular, I don't know, smell and feeling, and we'd have to line up before we went into class, and we were the younger group, and then you'd see the older ballerinas just walk out, and they were so graceful and beautiful, and yeah.
So, Charlie, you spent most of your time studying and developing your artistic practice in mainland UK, and returned to Malta, I'm not certain about this, five or 6 years ago, where you've since established a very successful practice, which I would describe as interdisciplinary. Maybe, we could discuss that as well, if you would call it.
So I've been back for 2 years.
2 years?
It feels like 100 being stuck in isolation for the past few weeks. Oh. Yeah, so about 2 years I've been back, but it never felt like I was really gone, because I'd always be, back and forth. I didn't developing a practice, I guess, really, it happened here and there. I studied film in the UK, so that part of my practice was developed there for sure. And I worked for a performance artist for a while, and did some other work for other performance artists. So I was influenced by that. A lot of them doing, socially engaged work, but then I think a lot of it was just happened by chance, by being both there and here, and kind of merging the two. And yeah, I guess it is interdisciplinary. Film is my that's where I feel most comfortable, but I do join other types of practice. But even in the way I build things, I think I build worlds that are almost like film sets. So you mentioned Sempre Viva and Latitude 36, but my last show was Scheherazade, which was at Valletta Contemporary, and that was open for a few months, and that looked at the Maltese diaspora in London. And you had it was meant to be the imagining of a Soho club environment, which used a lot of different types of materials. But I have one set way of working. I think it's just what inspires me at the time. And
so with your experience of moving back and forth between Malta and London, are there any, is there anything you've observed that might suggest a distinction between the two geographies, that would say, island?
In terms of work, or in terms of, loads.
In terms of work as a student or as a visual artist.
I'm so glad I studied abroad. I really am, and I don't mean that to belittle. The education system here is just, especially film, I was exposed to a lot more. Having somewhere like the BFI just round the corner, and amazing lecturers, and a freedom as well to examine. I also, working with performance artists, especially a lot of them are quite DIY and work with not much funding, is this sense that it's okay to mess up and it's okay to start again. And here I don't necessarily feel that. It always feels like you constantly have to, whatever you make has to be the perfect thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I don't know, I feel a lot more pressure. I feel there's less chance to experiment, even if you, in some of the ways you apply for funding, this is what you're applying for, it has to be exactly the same thing that you end up with, or the same product. Well, where is that play, and where is that, and the ability that even testing things out sometimes, it's you get a lot of artists, they'll just do one thing and it's straight in the press, or it's so there's a lot of pressure there, I think, which I didn't necessarily feel in London, or watching people around me work, because I've never shown anything there, so I wouldn't really know. But that's something I saw. But here there's a lot of I'm really lucky here. I have a great network of people that support me, and I hope I support them in the same way. So, but then you build that anywhere you are, right? You should always try and build your own community.
Yeah, I do. My experience of Malta, I do feel that is something that's quite particular to this place, that you meet. I was going to, in my next question, to make reference to this idea that, in the natural world, the insularity of an island is actually thought to result in greater diversity in species. It's called island biogeography. And I was going, I was wondering, does this theory apply to human creativity on an island?
Oh, that's a really tough one, especially because I looked at that when I was doing my PhD, which I never got around to finishing. Now maybe coronavirus is the time.
No, maybe now's the time.
Maybe now's the time. But this idea, island comes from Latin insula, right? So this insularity, how does that impact? And I looked at it on how it impacts on our filmmaking as a nation. And as it did it become more diverse, or did it create? And I don't think it did. Okay. I think and it didn't evolve straight away, and there are loads of reasons that I think, but I'm not going to go into those. But the things that I notice are I said I'm really lucky in that I have a community that I'm able to work with, but you don't really find that sense of community a lot. I see a lot more of a clash, or of a people not wanting to really share their ideas with others just in case. You know, it's so small. You're always competing for the same funds, the same jobs, the same everything. So that competition doesn't really help much. I think when you're trying to create, that's one thing I would say. And now we're influenced, you know, by the internet, and you can get everything. I can watch any film I want now. But before, where were your influences? You know, it was much harder to be influenced. So unless you went away and you experienced other things, there wasn't really much. So so you end up with a lot of things being made that were particularly similar, like all the time. If that makes sense. But it's exposure. So if you're not exposed, what's going to move forward?
But there is in the community that you work in particular, there are people who come from many other places.
Yeah, I think that's.
I guess they're bringing in those experiences and those references, and there's, you know, that's the advantage there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and I work in both, you know, similar people, same people sometimes even, and that's it. And they are mostly foreign or have spent a lot of time abroad. And there, I mean, it's also that idea of, you know, either, you know, we're never going to make anything good enough because we're from here, or it just goes the opposite, where it's everything I do is great and I'm not going to take any criticism. So there's no balance.
Yeah, which taps into that classic island mentality that we're not going too far into, but it is this.
So what is that? I see that you're constantly battling with that, and there is, unfortunately, in the arts still an old mentality of things having to be a certain way. You know, whether that's art, film, you know, you have to abide by certain rules, which is nonsense. Yeah,
we need to change the rules. Just coming back to Latitude 36, which was the book about the Maltese diaspora, you went to places. You went to Australia, didn't you? Which is also
I went to Australia for a different project entirely. Okay. So I didn't really. But while I was there, I just went down to the community centre because where was I? I was in Melbourne. Because I'd been studying. I'd been working with the Maltese diaspora well, especially with Latitude 36. So I wanted to go and just, you know, meet some Maltese and see if the communities were any different to the other ones that I met in, because I went to America, you know, someplace, and Canada, and obviously the UK, and so I just wanted to see what the difference was.
So
similarities there were.
And with this project, you were traveling to these places and capturing stories of, you know, many people, many of the Maltese diaspora. And I wanted to ask you, you know, do you feel that these people still carry with them any distinctive qualities or ideals, which, in your opinion, shout Islander?
Well, it depends where you are. The further away you are, the more likely that's the case. And it's really interesting, but the rivalry is still there. There are always two rivals. So you saw in Detroit, the two clubs are rivals. In Australia even, and I was only there, you know, not for as long as I was in the other places, but one of the women who ran the centre, who was, you know, second generation, said it's really funny, people that voted one way in the 50s before they moved and the ones that voted the other way don't talk to each other still. Because there's still, you know, so politics, but also a divide. There's always a divide. But then there's always the other thing, which is the community, the sense of, you know, helping each other out, and you see that a lot. I thought it was just, there's in Detroit, the work that people did when Maltese were coming over to settle, and how they you know, they brought them into the community. And I think that is really Maltese. No, we look out for our own, always. Always. And that's really lovely.
Did you, so in these travels, did you happen to meet any dancers, or has, you know?
No, I didn't, which is a shame. I mean, well, unless you count all the people I met in the clubs who just love to, we love to dance.
Oh, there's that as well.
There's that kind of dance. It's a very strange podcast to be on when we're talking about dance, when my work doesn't really use dance, which I hope it will one day, because that would be amazing. But maybe I'll find a project. Think of one now. There is time. But the only dance that has been in my work is the striptease, really, because Scheherazade, as I said, is based on Soho and the strip club idea. So that's the only dance that's ever featured in my work. So I used old footage of the striptease in London, which was more, in the 50s and 60s,
mm-hmm.
had more of a routine to it. Was more theatrical.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've spent a lot of time watching strip
choreographed.
2 years, very choreographed and really beautiful to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the only, and that is dance.
Absolutely. Many places, particularly in the EU, have held to this idea of a kind of borderless cosmopolitanism, where culture and ideas and bodies flow freely and without fear. And now, and not just now, I mean, it's been coming for a long time, we see borders. And I want to ask, how do you imagine our artists and venues and festivals and institutions might adapt to this kind of closing in?
Well, we're already seeing them adapt, aren't we? I mean, I've watched more theatre shows this week than I had last year, because everyone's putting everything online. So the digital is great. I'm seeing a lot more people make stuff. The arts will always survive in one shape or another. It will. The arts has survived, so much turmoil, and it's still there. It's what brings us some kind of hope, I suppose.
But in a local sense, I mean, we still have that material coming in digitally, but in terms of our local venues and festivals and institutions, if they're becoming more reliant on work that's being produced locally.
Well, I mean, and I can, so film, for instance, where we are we're an industry that's very reliant on foreigners.
Yeah.
And that's because we service a lot of film, so we're always waiting for a film to come, and then everyone's scrambling to try and get a job. And people aren't moving up in the same way as they should be, because we're always, we're never given proper roles. And that's when you start to realize, oh, it's a shame we didn't invest in our own filmmakers, because now we'd be making our own stuff. Which isn't to say that we're not, because even yesterday I read an article, and there are a group of filmmakers who are doing stuff, who have set some kind of challenge, and they're making, I think, 20-minute shorts. Amazing. That's really great. Does it take the coronavirus for us to start making our own stuff? That's terrible, but why not? But people have always been making film. I think if now you can see that there is really a necessity to invest in people working here who can make content here, and not just content for here.
Yeah. Because
if we'd invested in our own filmmaking practices, years and years and years ago, we could be on Netflix. We could be making those shows that are doing well. People could be making stuff in groups here without having to rely on, a foreigner to come here, a foreign director, foreign DOP, foreign studio. And maybe this will be the way to build our infrastructure better. It might not. I mean, I hope so. But it just goes to show why it's important to invest in creativity here.
Yeah. Now we have hindsight, but it's really time to act, isn't it? And it's
I don't know, maybe this will let us take stock a little bit and hopefully influence how things move forward.
But you feel optimistic about the creative industries and
well, what can you do? I mean, it's either feel optimistic or just cry in a corner. Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope that this demonstrates something, at least, that we need each other to work and to work together, and maybe to just stop being, stop navel gazing and just stop taking ourselves so bloody seriously all the time. I think that's what it is. That's really what it is. Inject a bit of humor into something, and also, yeah.
We need a bit more play, a bit more fun. I mean, we do.
Oh my God, yes, a bit more play. Like our arts don't have to be so heavy. Like really, it's lighten up.
We need to lighten up. I mean, I'm wondering about that. This what I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. This idea that islands are thought of, as places where there is a lightness, that life does flow at a different pace, and it's
one thing that you asked me before was what commonalities did I see between like the people here and the communities abroad. We're funny. We're really funny.
Yeah.
We have like the best sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it's just ridiculous, but we are humorous. So then why can't we be as playful in other? It's like we have to make serious work because no one else will take us seriously.
Yeah. So you feel that needs to flow through. Is that, and that's, I mean, do you think that playfulness and that sense of humor is a particular Maltese thing? Is it something that might relate to being an island in the Mediterranean? Is it is it a characteristic that you would attribute to our geography?
Yeah, I think so. I think our humor's just so distinct, though, isn't it? It can be so over the top, just and we like to just take the piss out of each other. But when we won't do we don't have satire, for instance. We do now. There's a lot more satirical content being made, but we poke fun at each other, but you wouldn't at the establishment so much, I guess, unless you did it once a year at Panto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm talking about the arts, not yeah, I think that's starting to change. But it's always that fine line, like who are you going to offend, and are you going to be taken to court for something really silly, or so there's a bit of paranoia, I think, that comes with humor.
There's the direct line to people is very short and
exactly.
Yeah. So in closing, is there anything you would say about being on an island, say in your recent projects? Do you feel that anything resonates, anything comes through in your work that really says to you, I'm on this tiny little rock surrounded by water, and that's influenced your creative practice somehow?
Oh, I'm never really good at looking at my own work and what I make it and I move on. I don't know. Do I think there's anything? Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. Maybe the lack of confidence that I spoke about before, I think is there in my work. Not. I don't know how to put that actually. Maybe it's it's bombastic and subtle at the same time.
Maybe that lack of confidence that you referred to comes from a lack of critical thought, a lack of criticism in general, and I don't mean negative. I mean, say criticism, people immediately think a negative criticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly.
Constructive criticism. That the lack of that doesn't allow people to reflect on their work in the way that they should. They just feel that there's this insecurity.
And I agree with that. I think. So it doesn't really answer your question. There's something in there.
It's a good way to close, I think.
Yes, rambling.
We like to ramble. Okay. Well, thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's really great to hear your thoughts, and we hope to see you at the next ÄsfinMalta production, so you can start working with choreographers and dancers in your field.
Yeah, maybe I'll bring my tap shoes.
Please, I'll get a pair as well, because I'm also a former tap dancer. So,
well, yes, maybe we'll start. This is what coronavirus is going to do. Bring a new duo.
I should.
Out,
I'll
Fred
get
and Ginger.
yeah, I'm all for that.